My name is Tammy. I'm here tonight to present to you the Municipal Budget Playbook. And I'm sorry that title is only about 2 hours old, so I'm stumbling over the title. We had another one and we decided to change the name at the last minute. Basically, I'm just here to talk to the Finance Committee, the Budget Committee, to be able to talk numbers and some oddities that go outside of the normal thoughts of the Budget Committee. More on the finance side of things. So we do typically do presentations to the board at least every other year, sometimes more often. And within those presentations, we spend a lot of time on the law that goes with it. Tonight, we're not going to spend a lot of time on the law. We're going to do an overview. We will discuss some of the law with it. We're going to do an overview of what this is. It's going to be then the role of the legislative governing bodies and then the Budget Committee. We're going to discuss revenue and expenses. We're going to spend a good amount of time on fund balance because that's a topic that's a word people have heard and a lot of people have no clue what fund balance is. And then we're going to talk about property taxes and what makes it up. So, starting with the overview. Yes, against what some of the naysayers in the world say, there really is oversight to the process and how this all happens at town meeting. So there are a bunch of laws that support what it is that we do, that you do as the Budget Committee. So RSA Chapter 32 is the Municipal Budget Act. And that will go through everything you need to know about your budget and how it's made up. Who puts the budget together? When is it presented? Who's in charge of letting the public know about it? There are a couple of ways, depending on things that your town has voted on how that can be done. That's all covered in Chapter 32. Then there is Chapter 33, which is the Municipal Finance Act. This is the chapter that allows you to borrow money. Right? Not all of us have that $50 million to redo a new large complex somewhere where we can pay for that in 1 year. So we borrow to be able to do that. And this is the law that allows us, the chapter that allows us to do that. Then there's also Chapter 35. Chapter 35 covers capital reserves. Capital reserves are basically the savings accounts for your town, the money your taxpayers have been willing to give you to put aside for very specific reasons, and those reasons are something your town has come up with and defined. Then there's Chapter 31. Chapter 31 is a chapter that your Board of Selectmen should pay attention to. This is one that's your governing body. This is a chapter that talks about what the powers and duties of each official in town has. Then chapters 39 and 40, they cover the town meeting process, what has to be done at town meeting, whether you're traditional or like Wolfeboro is, your SB2 or the official ballot referendum. And then finally, there's Chapter 21J. Now, 21 tells us that it's a state of New Hampshire chapter, and 21J is specific to the Department of Revenue. The Department of Revenue Administration oversees the entire budget process for a municipality. So when municipalities are going through where they want to be able to do their budget, there's warrant articles that are presented to the public. This is something that DRA will oversee, because if it's done wrong, DRA has to disallow it. And that's not something DRA wants to do. So they work with the town to be able to educate the town to get where things will pass. One of the ones that I want to point out to people that go with here is no spending without an appropriation. So one of the things that I hear when I have traveled throughout the towns, throughout various portions of my career, is the public is worried about the fact that they're just going to spend the money any way they want to. And that's not true. So one of the odd things, I'll step aside just a second on this, One of the odd things about municipalities and the RSAs is, as a citizen, if the law does not tell us we cannot do something, then we can. The law tells us we cannot go out and punch everybody that upsets us, right? So we can't. But the law does not say that we can't go out with a smile on our face and say good morning, good afternoon, good evening. And because the law doesn't stop me from doing it, as a citizen, I can do that. The opposite is true for local governments. If the law does not tell us we can do it, then we cannot. All right, so a town cannot do something unless state legislature has told you they can. So that's one of the things that's unique, that's different with municipalities than it is with the regular citizen. And so here, one of the things that happens is that power can then fall to the public, to the voters. If the voters wish, and I do not recommend what I am about to say, I have seen it happen, which is why I'm using it as an example, I do not make this recommendation. One of the things that the public can do is they can zero out a department. And if the public zeroes out the department, then the governing body, your Board of Selectmen, cannot spend money towards that item. They can do it by zeroing out an individual warrant article. I do not know if you have one here in the library, but if you wanted to put in an elevator in the library, and that was a warrant article, and the public said no. It does not matter if the library went out and found a 100% paid grant. They could not put an elevator in the library that year because the public has already said no. They can also say no to a department. So this is what I'm saying I don't recommend, but if they wanted to step forward and zero out the entire police department budget, they have the right to do that as the taxpayers, as the voters, the citizens of town. And I have watched that happen. Thankfully, that department was one part-time police officer, it was the entire department, and they could fall back on the state police for their policing. But it's something that is in the power of the taxpayers. No means no, and if you tell them no for something, then for that year, you have to obey what your citizens have told you. So when your citizens say no, it is no. There's also violations of the budget law. So when the citizens say this is what we want to do, and then the governing body can take that, and they can move things around, and we're going to come back to that statement a little later. They can move things around. Once they have settled where things are, then they can say, let's not, let's not let that department go over the budget that we've now set for them after town meeting. So if you have a department head that says, I don't care. I understand you guys have been in a default budget for at least 2 years, right? So what if you have a department head that says, listen, I've fallen back on that default budget for 2 years. I cannot run my department in this budget. I'm just going to keep spending. I'm going to spend what I need to spend to run my department the way I want to. Well, hopefully your town manager catches a hold of that quickly and puts a stop to it quickly. But even if they don't, if this has fallen through the cracks, there is a law that says RSA 32:12, and remember 32 is that budget law, Municipal Budget Act, and 32:12 says that you can remove a person elected or not, elected or appointed, you can remove them from their position by them going over budget. And Blake versus Pittsfield is a court case that has upheld that law. So Blake versus Pittsfield is a department head, had been notoriously known for going over budget, and they went over budget enough and the board said, stop, this is your limit, stop. And the department head said, I don't care, and kept ordering things. When that department head lost their job, he took the town to court and said, you can't fire me for this. I have credentials that tell me that I'm good at my job and that this is the job that I should be able to have. And the court said, too bad. They told you to stop spending, and the law said to stop spending. You broke the law. They're allowed to fire you. So that is another power that is out there for the town to be able to have to control the spending on their departments. Another violation of the budget law that can happen, and this is what I alluded to on the last slide, is that DRA can disallow warrant articles. So if you are a budget committee, you are by being an official budget committee town, you are limited to a 10% rule. That at the deliberative session, your citizens cannot go higher than 10% more of what you have opted to do for a budget. If they go, say your citizens are feeling generous this year, and at deliberative session, they go 20% higher, DRA is going to start disallowing warrant articles because you cannot go more than that 10%. So that's one of the reasons that they're going to do it. If you put in a warrant article for the town to do something that is illegal, DRA is going to disallow it because the town's not allowed to do that. If you have something that you haven't posted meetings properly, you didn't hold your meetings before the deadlines that are required through that chapter 39 and 40, then DRA is going to come through and say you're in default and you have to fix this, and this is how you fix this. So they are going to watch everything. They're going to go over it and they're going to make sure you're doing things right. All right, so then we come to the three major players in the whole budget process. That's the legislative body, the governing body, and the budget committee. The legislative body, when you are an official ballot town, an SB2 town, the legislative body is the group of voters who show up both at your deliberative session and at elections. That's your legislative body. Now, an interesting note is at your deliberative session, this is where your legislative body comes together to discuss things. Therefore, it's a legislative session, and the First Amendment rule doesn't necessarily come into play in a legislative session. I am not a citizen of your town. I cannot show up at that deliberative session and say First Amendment law says I have the right to stand up here and filibuster if I want to. I do not, because I'm not part of your legislative body. I'm not allowed to talk at your meeting, and you have the right to kick me out of the meeting. Powers, certain people have the right to kick me out. The public doesn't, but the powers that run the meeting do. And I can be removed because I don't have a right to talk and to disrupt that legislative meeting.
So, how do you determine a citizen? Is it a voter, a taxpayer, someone who rents in town?
So the legislative body, now I am not a lawyer, I am a finance person, so take what I say with a small grain of salt, but I had picked up a lot from the lawyers. The legislative session would be somebody who has the right to speak, and in my opinion, that is only somebody who's eligible to carry that voter card. I'm presuming that you follow what the majority of the state does, and when I walk in, I get a voter card or a bracelet or something that shows that I have the right to talk. Right, so that's my take on the law, but I'm not the lawyer. All right, so the other powers and duties that a legislative body has is they are the ones that approve all the appropriations. Without their approval, the town doesn't have the ability to spend that money. They also vote to create funds common to the municipal world. So this is where we could vote to create a police special revolving fund, or an ambulance revolving fund, a recreation revolving fund, a capital reserve, an expendable trust fund. This is what we mean when we say that they have the right to create funds. They have citizen authority to propose appropriations by petition. All it takes is 25 voters or 2% of your voter checklist, whichever is less, to put together a petition to say, The town isn't taking care of my road. I want my dirt road in this back little area, I want it paved. I want it brought up to be pavement. If you have 25 people who agree to that, it gets to go to the floor of your deliberative session. It doesn't matter if the budget committee says no. It doesn't matter if the town manager says no. It doesn't matter if the board of selectmen say no. If it's a petition, it's going to go to the legislative body. And they have the right to decide whether or not we're going to pave that road that 2 people live on and that's 10 miles long. All right, and yes, again, example I've seen. All right, so they also have the ability to amend separate articles to reduce or to zero out appropriations. Now, you have to be careful in the amendments. You can't change the purpose of an amendment. So we can't say that we want to take a warrant article that says that we want to, we want to create a capital reserve fund to buy a new truck, to be able to buy or repair a new truck for a specific department. You cannot take that and turn around and say, we want to be able to buy equipment for the ambulance with this. That's not how it was noticed. That's a change of purpose. You cannot do that. You cannot take that warrant article and say, we want to turn around and turn this into, and I don't know, is your town clerk tax collector combined position or 2 separate people? So they cannot take that capital reserve, I want to create a capital reserve, and try to amend it to say we want to combine the town clerk tax collector. Right? That they can't do because it's a drastic change of purpose. But they can amend it. We don't like that dollar amount. We don't want the governing body to be the agents to expend on this particular recreation. We want this group of people to expend. Be careful with that. Make sure it's legal for that group of people to do it. But they have the right to be able to make those kinds of amendments.
Excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
This budget committee, in fact, this year, we have voted on 2 petition warrant articles that involve spending money. We voted to recommend or not recommend.
And you are required to.
Okay.
All right, if you can recommend, you cannot recommend, that's your choice, but it's still gonna go to the deliberative session. It's still gonna go on the ballot.
Thank you.
You are also required, when it's a monetary article, to say whether or not you recommend.
Can I ask a question on that? We had this not too long ago. Is there, what happened was it was a tie vote, and local council gave us advice to try again. And if it's a tie vote the second time, then it goes as a do not recommend. Now my question is, can we, if we reach a tie, can we say, okay, we have a tie vote and this budget committee makes no recommendation? Have you ever heard of that?
I have not heard of that, and I'm going to reiterate, I'm not the lawyer. I'm going
Right.
to definitely say fall back on what your town attorney said.
Right.
But I have never heard of one going
Yeah,
as a,
right.
might you put down that it's 2-2 if
Right,
you
right.
only had 4 out of 5 people that showed up one night? Yes, but then what column on the state forms do you put it in? Do you put it in the recommended or do you put it in the not recommended?
And I was wondering if we could go down the middle. What the advice we got from town council was, take another shot at it. If it's a tie vote again, then you label it as do not recommend, because Robert's rules say with a tie vote, the motion fails.
And I actually think that it's practical, what your attorney said, I think was a practical
Yeah,
answer.
take a second shot at it.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so the last thing the legislative body can do is they can zero out a line item appropriations at the DRA budget form level. And that's where that no means no comes in. So what I mean by that is say, and I do not dislike police departments. I actually appreciate people who are willing to stand up and do what they do. But I'm going to pick on them a lot because they're easy to pick on when it comes to finances. And so a lot of times what I've seen is I have seen towns that will say, here's the chief's salary, here's the sergeant's salary, here's the lieutenants, here's the corporals, here's the officers. If somebody comes through and says, I don't like your lieutenant, and yes, I gave those out of rank order, I just realized that, but I don't like your lieutenant, so I want to zero out your lieutenant's line item. They can make that motion. They have the right at deliberative session to make that motion. They have the right to vote on that motion. That is not a no means no, because there's still money at the DRA level, which is the department as a whole. So the governing body has the right to transfer money into that lieutenant's line. All right, so do keep that in mind, that just because they've zeroed out an individual line, now that's your legislative body, that's not, and you as the budget committee can also zero out a line, governing body can overrule that, because again, it's not for that, it's not your job to say that you want to zero out a line, that's, you want to do away with a person. That's not your power to do away with a person or a position. You can make that recommendation, you cannot enforce it. That's an enforcement of the town manager, town manager, and the governing body, not your call. All right? All right, governing body. So here you guys are a little different, and I did not put in anything special. You are a town manager form of government, so there is some things here that might be a little bit of a gray area. You feel free to tell me when it's not the governing body's side that it's your job. I will gladly be corrected. So, per RSA 21:48, you are in this town, your governing body is the Board of Selectmen. All right, there are other bodies that you can have. If you have a charter, then it might be councilmen, it might be aldermen, but for this town, it's the Board of Selectmen is the governing body. It is the Board of Selectmen's job, unless dictated elsewhere, to prepare the warrant and to draft separate warrant articles. That is not the call of the Budget Committee. So the Budget Committee cannot say, well, they didn't give us this warrant article, but we want a warrant article too. You don't have the right to do that. Only your governing body has the right to do that, or the governing body does, not the Budget Committee. The governing body submits the proposed budget to the Budget Committee or to town meeting. In this case, it goes to the Budget Committee. So that's where you get a starting point. They prepare the manifest to pay all town expenses. Nice little note here to remember is the governing body is the spending authority, not the legislative body. The legislative body allows money to be spent. It is not that the town will spend it. That's the decision to spend it is a decision of the town manager and the governing body, not the legislative body. So there might be a warrant article that says that, a petition warrant article that passes, that says we're going to raise money and we are going to paint every building in town an awful, awful shade of whatever color you think of is the worst color out there. That does not matter. If the board says we are not wasting our taxpayer monies to do that, we are not going to have that happen, it's their call to not paint those buildings.
I have a question on that. Are they then allowed to raise revenues off of that warrant article and then not expend them, and then those funds end up in the unassigned fund balance, or how would that work?
So in my case, it was a petitioned warrant article.
Okay.
So in a petitioned warrant article, you cannot take money out of a petitioned warrant article to use for something else. So they would not be able to use that money for anything else in town. But they could, so that the taxpayers aren't raising it, there is a way to, on a form in the future they do with the state, to add in to say we expect to get a little bit of revenue for this purpose that they're not going to get, but it's just a way to offset that expense. Yes, there is a way to do that. All right, it's a gray area, but you have the ability on a certain form, the town administrative office has the ability to do that on that specific DRA form to add in a revenue so that the taxpayers are not paying for that. All right, but you have to be careful in what kind of an article it is, because again, mine was a petition article, which deems it to be a special article, which means that the town could not spend that money on something else. So in that case, it might make sense to tell the state you've raised that money so that the taxpayers aren't spending it. All right, the other things that the governing body can do is they can pay all sums of money received. They have to, not can, they have to pay all sums of money received to the town treasurer. There are laws out there that say how often they have to do that. They have to establish and maintain appropriate internal control procedures. Now, I know that years ago, before I got in this business, and I'd hear that phrase, I'd say, what does that mean? What does an internal control mean? They are required by law to set up and enforce policies that will help deter I can't just say fraud, because it's not just fraud, but fraud is the biggest thing that everybody's mind goes to. We don't want our money stolen. So it's their job to put policies in place to be able to deter wrongdoing of any kind. No, we do not want people to dress like that when they're in the town office. No, and when I say that that's an extreme. I'm not a person who's going to tell you how to dress, but I am a person who's going to say, please don't dress like that when you're in the public. You have to be respectful. That's something they can put in their policies. All right, the last thing you want is to me walk up and I'm going to age myself. Does anybody remember Alice Flo from the TV show Alice? Walk up chewing my gum, hand on hip, and how you doing, baby? This is not how you want me to greet the public. So you can have policies that stop me from doing that. You can have policies that say, that this is how the money shall be counted every day and deposited every day so that you know that money is being put in the bank where it belongs. All right, those are the kinds of things that internal controls mean. They can have policies to say, and how many people know the person? If you're not the person yourself, you know the person. They can and should have the policies that say, no, do not write your passwords down on that piece of paper, lift up the keyboard and store all your passwords right there under the keyboard. Right? That is a very strong internal control that they should have that says you cannot do that. That's what we mean by internal controls. They also have to maintain records of all town financial transactions, so they can't spend money without a trace on how they've spent money. They cannot take money without a trace of how they've taken that money. And then they annually review and adopt an investment policy. That is separate than an internal control policy. An investment policy is the only way that the governing body has any sort of control over the town treasurer. I have seen things be as simple as one trustee of trust funds that I used to deal with says, I don't care that the bank is paying 0.02%. This is the town of X, and all of our money is going to be in savings account in the town of X. Well, that's not really fiscally right way to do things. All right, because now you're not taking and investing the town's money. I don't mean go out and buy, there are laws that will stop you from going out and buying stock in the shady deal companies. All right, there's laws that will stop that as well. But I do mean that the law says you have to have your money deposited within a certain time. Maybe the investment policy says that you have to bring your money more often than just that one. And look, they told me an hour. We are like only on slide 9 of 49. I need to talk faster.
So just quick, an audit is one
Yes.
of those internal controls, correct?
An audit is a separate law. It's not an internal control. It is a separate law, and that law does state every municipality shall have an audit. There are multiple ways to have an audit. An audit can be, there are 3 things you can do for an audit. One is you can have an independent audit firm come in. That is the preferred method. You can have locally elected auditors. That is completely allowed by the town or by the state. You can do a locally elected auditor. And then if you have less than 700 residents, 750 residents in your town, you can ask for a waiver. But if you have a waiver, there is special things the state wants you to do. So that is different. Again, if I can't answer a question, if you're not an official, or did I not see the hand go all the way up?
You can't answer a question if I'm not an official.
If you're not a town official, I am sorry. That's rules of the organization I work for.
But I don't need you to answer this.
Perfect.
Okay.
You can ask it later. They're going to allow questions after I leave.
Who is our town treasurer? So let those people who know answer later. How's that?
All right, budget committee. Really quick for your budget committee. Your budget committee, they have to schedule and hold meetings. You have to review proposals, request information. You prepare the budget. You forward the final proposed budget to the governing body. You have to have your recommendations on all monetary articles. That I'm not saying you have to recommend. You have to have your recommendation of yes or no to that article. And you have to review the current year's expenses. That means your job is not done as soon as the voting is done. You are supposed to meet throughout the year to review the expenses. But notice my middle one. You do not control the spending. This is just your way of saying where might we have gone wrong in the budgeting process, and how do we make this better and work for this next year. All right, 10% rule we've discussed a little. The 10% rule is the fact that your voters at deliberative session cannot go more than 10% higher than what the board has allowed. There are some certain things that come in to play. Your debt is taken, is not counted as part of that 10%. You know, there's a couple of those rules. Most of that is here. Default budget preparation. This is, unless voted otherwise, this is something that is prepared by the select board. The select board or whoever does prepare, who prepares the default budget here?
Select board.
Okay. So it is a governing body, preparation here, which means that it falls on your town manager. And so he has certain rules he has to go through and he has to follow. One of the things I want you to be aware of with the budget, the default budget, is when they talk the default budget, it comes back to the budget, not the way the town prepared it the year before, but the last voted in budget. So when a default budget is the budget that is accepted, then what happens is you might not be able to afford to give cost of living raises to your employees. If you do come up with money and you take it away from something else to give your employees a cost of living raise, that raise is not part of the following year's default budget. Which means now if you fall in a default budget for a second year or a third or a fourth or a fifth, you're having to find money somewhere else in your budget, not just for the current year's cost of living, but every year prior. And this is hard. And I understand as a taxpayer, I write my check. I swallow hard before I hand that check over. Stick it in the mail, whichever way I happen to do it that day. And yes, I'm cheap. I will not pay that credit card fee, so I still do a check for that. But it's very, very hard as a taxpayer, and I get that. And I get that you guys on the budget committee are taxpayers. So you have to make these decisions yourselves. But aren't you getting a cost of living raise? Try to remember that you want your employees that you're asking to be loyal to the town to continue to be loyal to the town, and they need to be able to do something too. So these towns that have been stuck in a default budget for 10 years, I do not know how they've done it. And yes, there is at least one town that's been a default for that many years.
Just want to distinguish collective bargaining agreements as opposed to
Collective bargaining
cost of living
agreements,
adjustments.
collective bargaining agreements are outside of the
Okay.
default budget, yes.
Thank
Collective bargaining agreements are something that the town has voted on within the booth as a separate article, so those can be added into the default budget, yes. But not all of your employees are part of a union. Therefore, the ones that are not part of the unions are the ones you're struggling to not give raises to. Another thing to keep in mind is when the law changes for some of these items, one of the ones that is a common one is the New Hampshire retirement system. I'm presuming Wolfeboro is part of the New Hampshire retirement system. I'm getting a nod yes. When the rates for the New Hampshire retirement system change, those changed rates can be incorporated into the default budget. All right, so you are not required to do, the last year's percentage when the rate changes. You can increase your default budget to an increased rate. That is good news. If the federal government decided, and they did do this one year, actually they lowered the employees. They did not increase the employers. But if the federal government decided to increase Medicare or Social Security employer match, that's federal law that we have no control over. Same with New Hampshire retirement. You can increase that in the default budget. All right, so here I've already given you the examples of some of them when I talked about the cost of living, but it also works the other way. If you have in a budget that is accepted, you have the purchase of a one-time purchase of an electrical power generator for the town hall. Well, once it's in and it's installed, that's not something you're going to have next year. So when the default budget is calculated, you cannot include those one-time items. So that would have to be excluded from the calculation of the default budget. Effects of the default budget. We have discussed this. I've talked about the cost of living raise, but what's the other big thing that we were hit with right after COVID was inflation. Inflation skyrocketed on the other side of the lockdown. And that's something in a default budget, you cannot build inflation into your default budget. So that 1 year that it went up 8%, was just about 8% was inflation that 1 year. The town, if you were in a default budget that year, would have to be finding things to not do in order to pay the bills for what you have to that have increased with inflation. All right, so you have to keep that in mind as well. And yes, here is that bottom one that was in there is your collective bargaining unit
Right, thank you.
agreement. All right, revenues and expenses. So the way that the world is supposed to work is that your budgets have to balance. You have to have as many revenues as you do expenses. So your estimated revenues plus taxes, and I say basically, we're going to get into why there's a little bit of a difference, basically need to equal your total appropriations. The more you can raise in revenues, the lower your taxes are. But the town is also limited by state law what they can raise for money. You want to have fundraisers, you're allowed to have fundraisers. You can have fundraisers to offset the cost of something. I have no clue if Allison does, but it's something that we watch libraries do often, have a fundraiser for a specific thing. So those are ways you can raise money outside of taxes. You can impose fees and fines on certain things, but they have to be fees and fines that are allowed by law. If the law doesn't allow you to impose a fee, then you can't do it. So if I say I want to impose a fine for anybody who walks through the door of a town-owned building, that every Monday if you wear pink, I'm going to charge you. Every Friday if you wear black, I'm going to charge you. That's not something you're allowed to do because the law doesn't allow us to do that. And so we have to find ways that we can raise money. Types of money that the towns can raise. It includes taxes. When I say taxes, I don't just mean property taxes. If you have somebody who cuts timber in town, that is called a timber or a yield tax. That is a tax. Gravel tax. Do you have any gravel pits in town where you might be getting excavation tax out of? So there are taxes other than just property taxes. License permits and fees, this is a huge one for this town. This is where your motor vehicle registrations go. This is in almost every town. The top three revenues are property taxes, motor vehicles, and state revenue. Those are typically the highest three revenues for the town. Monies from federal government. That is, they don't just hand over money to hand over money. They have to have a reason, but it is something that might be able to offset cost. I'm going to tangent here for one moment, and one of the things when I was a town administrator that I heard on a regular basis is, Tammy, why don't you go after grants that offset the operating budget? They don't make grants that offset an operating budget. As much as it would be nice to tell our taxpayers, listen, I went out and I got $1 million of this grant to just offset the cost of running the town of Wolfeboro. It's not going to happen. All right, few and far between can you find a grant that'll actually offset operating. What it offsets is what's outside of the normal running of the town. You have water sewer. It is not cheap to replace infrastructure in water sewer. So there are grants out there that may help offset the cost of doing that. But they're not going to come in and say, let me give you money to offset the tax collector's salary. It's not going to happen. State sources, very similar. The state will give us money, but they don't give us money to offset just anything. What they give us, they come with rules. We're going to come back in just a second to the state sources. Charges for services, you have an ambulance. When the ambulance goes out, the ambulance gives a bill for going out. That's a charge for service. When you dispose of something at your transfer station, you have to pay for it. That's a charge for service. I like my tangent, so I'm going to tangent. Please keep in mind your ambulance will never make money unless they do transfers. And when you have just a small, I understand you guys have recently gone back to ambulance in town. Congratulations. Know that you're not going to make money on this. If you only have one ambulance, you're not going to take it out of town to do transfers because you need it in town to support your residents. All right, so it'll offset, but it's not going to pay for itself. Miscellaneous revenues, this would be something like your interest on investments. Is the bank, are you getting money out of your bank to have your cash there? Sale of town property might fall in here. Interfund operating transfers in, we talked about capital reserves. This would be able to be revenue that's going to offset your purchase by taking the money out of your capital reserve. That's a revenue. And then proceeds from long-term bonds and other sources, notes, bonds, and other sources. This is something that we have recently put together, this slide. And what you are looking at here is the very bottom, very small number on the bottom is the money that the state of New Hampshire gives to, and this is statewide. This is the sum of all towns. This isn't just your town. So that very bottom number is the money that they have given out for environmental purposes. The darker blue in the middle is the money they have given out for general fund. This is like your meals and rooms tax. And then the top number is the highway funds, the top of that block. So that's information that's money they've given us to the highway block grant they give us to help offset the cost of maintaining our roads every year. Construction grants, when they give us money to help offset the cost of a bridge, that's that. That yellow, orange, whatever color you want to call that line up top, what I did is this is where we started in 2009. And that line is the inflation line. So what is the 2009 revenue line and continually compound inflation every year? We're not making money off the money the state gives us. We're losing money year to year off of what they give us because our rates are going up with inflation, but the revenue that we're receiving is not matching that. All right, so we can't say we have to rely on the state for this money because it's not happening. I hope I'm not stealing thunder of your town manager from deliberative session here. But I was given a sneak preview of some of your information for the budget, and this is not final. All right, this is not final figures, but this is a sneak preview. And this is money and how your money is being divvied out. And yes, your proposed taxes is just shy of 15 million, But this is proposed taxes just shy of 15 million on a $36 million total budget. I can't tell you how wonderful this is, because most of the towns that I have assisted, this property tax number is about over in here. All right, it's more than 50%. So the fact that your town is able to do this and keep your taxes, I think that's 42%. The fact that your town is able to do this, it's phenomenal. Now this picture does have enterprise funds involved in it. They're broken out here, so your water, your electric, your sewer, the ice rink, they're all part of this. And they basically support themselves. An enterprise fund's job is to basically support itself. Sometimes you can't always do it. The law stops us, by the way, of going the other way. The law says, hey, maybe the electric fund is making money hand over fist. Probably not, but maybe. All right. If it is, the law says you cannot use that money to offset your general taxes. All right, that is stopped by the law to say an enterprise fund cannot support the general taxation. So we'd have to be careful with that. But they do allow taxes to support an enterprise fund, but in the accounting world, we frown on that. So again, high numbers, phenomenal numbers. The fact that you're down to that kind of percentage, I'm very impressed.
Excuse me, that is probably the most confusing item in this town. Most, or I should say, a good number of people do not understand that. They think that our taxes will be, we are going to pay taxes on 35,913,500.
Yeah.
When it's not true.
They are not.
Not
They
even
are not.
15 million bucks.
Correct. It'll be just shy of 15 million, give or take. We're going to come up to that in a little bit.
Thank you.
Expenses, I've gone over. These are the DRA form level expenses is what they are. Here is the sneak peek of how your expenses are divvied out. This is all of it. This is that almost $36 million broken out a little. I'm not going to spend time on them because Jim's going to spend a lot of time on them at the deliberative session. We have spoken of transfers appropriations, that your governing body can transfer money. And that you can't do it with special warrant articles. I'm going to fly over that. And we're going to talk fund balance. All right. And yes, I have dealt with a selectman who, when I would talk fund balance, every time he would look at me and he'd say, yeah, that's that monopoly money again. Right. All right. So it's not, and I'm going to show you that it's not. So fund balance, we have to be careful with some wording. Fund balance reserves is different from reserved funds. Fund balance reserves, and this is one of the reasons that we no longer use reserves in fund balance anymore in the accounting world, because it got confusing. This is to liken it to a business, to liken it to your home. This is your equity. This is what is the worth. A reserved fund is money that you have that has been put aside for a specific purpose. Have you guys ordered a fire truck recently in the past couple of years?
Yes.
All right. Got that really quick, didn't you? All right. You put in the order for it and it was there, what, about a year and a half later?
Yeah.
All right. So this might be money if the taxpayers approved not to lease it, like I think I just heard. If the taxpayers approved to purchase it, you've got that money the taxpayers gave you. You are reserving it until that fire truck comes in and you write the final check for it. That's a reserve. Your capital reserves, your expendable trust funds, those are reserves. So where does fund balance come from? Fund balance is the accumulation. How old is this town? Have you had your 250th yet?
This year.
This year? All right, so you are 250 years old. So this is 250 years worth of increasing your fund balance because your revenues at the end of the year were greater than your expenses, or decreasing that fund balance because your expenses were greater than your revenues. That's how fund balance comes about. Every time you have more revenue, it comes into equity, your fund balance. Now that sounds wonderful, except we have lots of things and ways we have to report to them. So there is this delightfully exciting group of people called Governmental Accounting Standards Board. And they set the accounting rules for all governments nationwide. And they have, with a pronouncement they had that was GASB 54, come up with 5 different categories of how we can reserve money, titles for these. So the first one is non-spendable. Non-spendable makes sense. It's what we have that we cannot spend. Do you have inventory? Does your highway department have a stack of culverts? Probably. Maybe not a huge one, but they probably have a supply of them. That's inventory. That's non-spendable. I cannot pick up that culvert and walk down the road and say, here, bank, I'd like to make my bond payment with this culvert. Right? It's not spendable. Prepaid expenses, when you have to pay dues early, maybe. If you have dues that are due in January, any kind of bill, not just dues. If you have a bill that is due in January, but because it's due on January 2nd, you had to write that check in December. That's a prepaid expense. So it's going to hit the expenses in 26, but the cash went out the door early. That's going to be a prepaid expense. Tax deeded property. When you have to take money, when you have to take a property and you're sitting on it, you haven't sold it yet, that's non-spendable. And then if you have money that has been donated to you, and perpetual care is the most common one of these, that you've been told, libraries often get grants that are non-spendable grants as well. You cannot touch the principal. So it might be cash, but it's still non-spendable because you're restricted by that donation, the bequest, however you got it, that it cannot be spent. Money that's restricted is money you have received that is restricted by the person who gave it to you. So that's that interest side of the perpetual care or the endowment that the library received. Those are ideas for that. Committed is the highest power of your town has told you to put that money away for a specific reason. The highest authority power in your town is your legislative body. So when they've created a fund, we talked about the fact that they have the right to create the funds, capital reserve funds, revolving funds. That's the kind of money that's restricted, that they've told you it can only be used for a specific purpose. Assigned is the money that your governing body has put aside, possibly your town manager in this. This would be the purchase order. This is going to be that they ordered. Now, how many of us, especially after COVID, Prime and Amazon went right out the window? You know, you used to get it in 2 days. You can't get it in 2 days very often anymore. If they've ordered something and it hasn't come in yet, that money it's a purchase order. It's encumbered at the end of the year. That's been approved by the governing body. That's what assigned means. What means the most to the rest of us, what means the most to those of us that have a checkbook that we're writing that check out of to pay our taxes, is unassigned. This is everything else that we have. And just because I heard it, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. I heard the word cash. It is not your cash. All right, consider your house. You buy a house. If you do it the way the banks want you to do it, I'm going to buy a really cheap house nowadays. I'm going to buy a $100,000 house. Impossible. And the banks, I agree with you nowadays, it's impossible. But the bank says they want 20% down. And I'm using $100,000 because I can do this math. So I put my $20,000 down at the bank, and I have an $80,000 loan. Right away, I have equity in my house of $20,000 because that's a part that I don't have loan on. Doesn't have a thing to do with the fact that I have $20,000 in the bank, does it? It's my equity, it's my worth. If I sell the house tomorrow and the market is stable, then I'm going to get that $20,000 back. 10 years from now, and I've chopped down on that mortgage, and maybe I have 40% equity now. Doesn't mean I have $40,000 in the bank, but it does mean if I sell my house, I should receive $40,000 of cash. So although there's a very strong tie between cash and unassigned fund balance, they are not the same. All right? Unassigned fund balance, we've discussed what that is, and use of fund balance. So when fund balance is used, it doesn't mean you get any cash. What it is you're expecting a loss. You have more expenses going out the door than you have revenue coming in. That's what the use of fund balance means. So every time on my house that I go and I get an equity loan, that's use of fund balance. I'm eating into my equity in order to be able to have that money to go spend it on whatever I want to or need to spend it on. So one of those phrases, and it makes me cringe, but we have all heard it. If you have ever been to a deliberative session, you have heard at least one person mumble under their breath, it's just the slush fund. It is not a slush fund, and it's not money that the town gets to use at will. There are only 3 ways that unassigned fund balance can be used. First lies in the power of your legislative body. So your legislative body, through the town meeting deliberative session for you guys, can say they want money to come out of fund balance to offset the cost of an article. That's how your legislative body can say they want to use it. You can also use it through emergency spending, and you guys had that this year. So this year, there was a particular entity that gave all of the people who utilized them an astronomically high bill and said, you have no choice, you have to pay this. And some people tried to fight it with lawyers, other people said, oh my gosh, and most of the time, not all, but most of the time the lawyers said, you have to pay it. It's part of what you signed, you have to pay it. And so it's my understanding, I haven't verified this, but it's my understanding that this town had to go to the Department of Revenue Administration and ask to be able to pay that bill using emergency spending. And that is the only way we can do emergency spending. Emergency spending is not something where the governing body can say, or the town manager can say, it's outside of the budget. We're just going to spend it out of that fund balance. Doesn't work that way. You have to go to the Department of Revenue and you have to beg them to use this money and prove to them why it is you need this money and it's emergency money. Easy ones to talk about is Mother Nature's been a little persnickety in the last decade or two. All right, and when she gets mad and throws a temper tantrum, she gets mad and she does some destruction. You might not have the money in your budget to repair the roads when she decides to take out millions and millions of dollars worth of road repairs. So that's a way to go to the governing body, to have the governing body go to DRA and say, we don't have this in our budget, we need this money. Even if you have FEMA who's going to help offset it, FEMA is only at most going to cover 75%. You may not have that 25% in your budget. So you still may have to go to them and ask for this money. And then the third way that the money can be used is it can be used by the governing body to offset the cost of the taxes. So remember, I'm going to back up one slide, that the use of fund balance is the expectation of a loss. So when the governing body uses fund balance, they're saying, we're not going to ask you for the taxes to balance this budget. We're going to take that loss and we're going to have it come out of our fund balance at year end. That's what the use of fund balance does. Mm-hmm.
In case of emergency, can the DRA be bypassed?
No,
Select board can't make that decision?
no.
Okay.
Only
thank you.
DRA can make it.
Okay.
And I have seen DRA say no on a regular basis.
Okay.
We live in New Hampshire. Seems kind of important that in our schools we have a furnace, keep our children warm in school. I have watched DRA say no to a school to replace a furnace. And they've said, find it in your budget, find it in your capital reserves. We see you have money in a capital reserve to pay for it. We will not allow it to come out of fund balance. So if they think you have another way to pay for it, they might say no.
Right, okay, thank you.
All right. So voted from fund balance, which you guys have done in 2024, legislative body and governing body said we were not going to use any fund balance. Last year in 2025, the governing body said, yes, we need some money to offset these taxes. We're going to use some. Both legislative bodies said yes, and governing body said yes. All right, and then what you see on the bottom is the estimated amount of fund balance at year end. We're going to come back to that. I got to talk faster. So emergency expenditures, we have just talked about that. Fund balance statistics, fun facts about them, because I'm a numbers person. I actually think this stuff is fun. Smaller governments tend to have a much larger fund balance percentage as compared to the larger towns. So if you have a town in the area who is maybe, less than 1,000 residents, if you look at their percentage of fund balance, it's probably higher than your percentage of fund balance. Right? That's very common that's how it works. Municipal fund balances have increased over the last 25 years because of economic uncertainty. We need that money. We feel that we want to be conservative and keep that fund balance just in case. And then municipalities with utilities saw a significant increase in fund balance requirements over the past 2 decades. And notice I have the word requirement. This is because the granting agencies, the federal granting agencies, have reached the point where they're now saying, we're tired of giving you people money all the time. So we're going to give you money, but we are going to force you to save money on top of what you have to pay us back if you had a loan, so that we don't have to give you as much money in the future. So they're asking you to save money to replace, for most of the time, it's reserves for short-lived assets, your vehicles, your meters, but some of them are now asking us to do the long-term assets as well, the infrastructure, the treatment plant, the pipes in the ground. They're asking us to put money away for that. So some of your enterprise funds, if you are getting federal money, those reserves are going up, not because the people that govern them are saying we want more money there, but because the ones we're getting our grant money from are requiring us to do that. All right, recommended levels of fund balance. Now I know this is small, I'm sorry, it was a lot of information that I had to squeeze on one line here. So it is recommended that by both National Government Finance Officers Association, Geekdom, and DRA, both say they don't want to see you go below 5%, and they frown on you going more than 17%. Doesn't mean you can't go more. And there are times that I have recommended to certain municipalities, based on what I know some of their longer term thought processes are, that you have a fund balance that is higher than that 17%. All right, these are recommendations, they're not mandatory. So in this case, what I have done, and I'll let you dig out your magnifying glass on the sheets that you have, I am showing you how the town, how it's calculated. So this percentage changes every year because it is the town's gross appropriation for that year, plus the county's net appropriation, the local school net, and the state school net appropriation, less your enterprise funds. Now you guys here in Wolfeboro have 4 enterprise funds, and less the debt that you have. That's what gives us the base number to decide what that percentage is on. Do not ask me who came up with that concept. I cannot tell you. I can't tell you the logic behind it. It's been this way for decades and decades. All right, so this is what they base the percentage on. Now, we've all seen what gets asked for every year by the town, the county, and the school, and that goes up and down year by year by year. So this base number goes up and down every year. All right, and then they do the percentages. And then just so that everybody here knows, in 2024, which would be one reason why the town didn't dip into the fund balance, is my presumption, you had almost 7% fund balance that you were retaining. In 2005, even though they dipped into it, you ended up with 9.5%. So that gave you the ability to dip into it.
So I have a question on that. So you're taking our town gross appropriations, so you're
Mhm.
taking that 38, but that doesn't include the unassigned fund balance in the MED, in our municipal education, our municipal electric department, which is sitting on 5.5 million.
Which is different. So
Okay.
this is gross appropriations. It
Okay.
doesn't have anything to do with that fund balance
Okay.
or in an enterprise fund, a net position, same concept, different words.
Yeah,
Doesn't have anything to do with that.
okay,
This is just the base of what they do the percentage on. All right, so they take the town's gross appropriations, so this year is that 35, almost 36 million.
yeah,
And then they take away from that the enterprise funds. Because the enterprise funds are supposed to be self-sustaining, so they don't have to have money that they're retaining to be able to continue to operate.
I think the question that's still open, not answered for Bobby, is we're taking away the enterprise funding. Is the balance sheet being, is that 16,
Nope.
211? So where does the, so I think Bobby's question still is
Why are we not
there's a
looking at things
nut
on the balance
of-
sheet?
There's a nut of fund balance in an enterprise fund.
But they are meant to be self-sustaining for their own purposes, and so that's where a rate setting would come into play, when whether it be your governing body or commissioners that run each of the enterprise funds, they would have to look at what rates to set. This basically boils down to just your governmental funds.
So this is the income statement of the, from my word, this is the income statement of the enterprise funds?
No, nothing to do with enterprise.
But you're
Enterprise is
saying less
taken
enterprise and
away,
debt,
correct,
Less enterprise and debt.
yes.
So you take out,
And again, I cannot tell you the logic behind this, because I don't understand the
can't
logic
follow it.
behind it. I don't have any clue why somebody came up with this, but this is what came up with decades ago on how to calculate the percentage.
and in our case, the debt situation for the town of Wolfeboro is all, it's all municipal.
Hmm.
We don't have electric debt, we don't have,
It's not uncommon.
it's all general on us.
Yep.
So that gross amount of debt comes out, right?
Correct,
Okay. Thank you.
correct. All right, so I can't answer the logic behind
Right.
how it works. I can just tell you the pieces that go
How
into
it
it.
works. Right, thank you.
I'd like to answer the how, but I've yet to get an answer that I understand, so I can't share
And
it.
it's healthy if you keep it between 5 and 17%.
According to those
Something
two
like
entities.
Yeah.
Now, in theory, and here I might have a dagger thrown at me. In theory, the town has a fund balance policy, and that policy will say that your fund balance should sit in a range of. All right, and then if you fall outside of that, how do you bring it back into it? That's what your policy should say. So that policy might say between the 5 and the 17 that's recommended. And then just for minor edification, the 17% is a rounded figure of, I think it's like 16.778%, which is 2 months of operating expenses. So I'm stressing operating. It doesn't count that purchase of the fire truck. It doesn't count the capital reserves. That's where the 17% comes from, is 2%, is 2 months of operating expenses.
Keeping the lights on.
How do you keep the lights on and the people inside working?
Should run that.
All right, so why are reasons why we don't want to bring this down to nothing? We need it, even though I did say it was not your cash balance, it has a direct impact on your cash balance. So we do need the cash flow. If we can avoid short-term borrowing and not having to pay interest on money we're taking just to be able to pay our bills, that's terrific. Your operating cycle might be another reason. Keep in mind, how often do we pay our taxes? Twice a year. How often do we pay our bills?
Every week.
Every week. All right, so your major influxes of revenue are only twice a year. So if our fund balance is high, again, it's not the cash balance, but there's a strong correlation to it. We have the cash to pay these bills. Keep it for the reserve for emergencies. When Mother Nature decides she's persnickety, when these companies slap us with these unbelievably once in a lifetime, we all pray, awful bills. It gives us increased investment on income. What's the offset of being able to have increased investment on the investment income? Is it gives us revenue your taxpayers don't have to raise. All right, so that's a nice side benefit. If you are looking at what your bond ratings would be, it does help protect the credit score and helps us lower interest rates if you work with somebody who looks at that. And then it may help avoid tax increases or service reductions by helping to steady the tax rate so that the taxpayers don't have to zero out departments, that the budget committee and the governing body don't have to reduce and get rid of services. So it helps steady that if we've got the fund balance. All right, now let's talk property taxes. Property taxes is a long, drawn-out process that is a year-long process. So it starts with the assessors, and do not ask me, I'm asked this a lot, I will not answer questions on how they come up with assessments. I'm not an assessor, I don't want to be. So they determine our property values. You guys have recently gone through a reval. You've seen that there are drastic changes. With that assessment, it is also the town's job to determine, are there any exemptions? The state does allow for certain entities to not have to pay taxes if they have properly filled out paperwork. And then veterans credits and other credits that we might allow people to not have to, individuals to not have to pay taxes. And then they come up with a warrant for the tax collector. And that warrant must be signed by the governing body, and it's handed off to the tax collector, and then the tax collector collects the taxes, liens what is not paid, and then will take the property if the liens are not paid. All right, that is the process. It sounds short, sweet, and simple, and any tax collector in the room any tax collector in the state will tell you that is really simplified, because there is a lot that goes behind this. The next slide, and I'm not going to get into a lot of detail on this because of the time, but the next slide is how they calculate it. I have put in your 2025 tax rate figures, so that what is here is Wolfeboro's figures. But to talk about it in generalities, you take the budget that was voted in March, and that comes down to what's a DRA form called a 232, and we subtract from that what the town is best guessing, and that's the right terminology for what we're going to receive for revenues. So they're making an educated guess that we are going to have revenues of. They have to do this in the end of August, and they're guessing what is it going to be in December. Well, as an example for the motor vehicles, I don't know if any of you remember quite a few years ago, the state said, we need some more money. And the state increased the state's portion of registrations. That killed the towns because there were a lot of people with multiple vehicles that did not register the other vehicles because they didn't want to pay the extra money. And then the towns lost their side of that revenue. So we can't predict always what's going to happen. That was one year where predictions were, okay, we're going to get about what we normally get. And then it plummeted. So that's why I'm saying it's a best guess. Then we have the fund balance use, and that is both what did your legislative body say at deliberative session that you're going to take out of fund balance, as well as what did the governing body say they're going to use for fund balance to offset the taxes. Those are taken away from the appropriations. Overlay. Overlay is what is the extra amount of money that we're going to raise because the assessors may have made a mistake and we have to abate taxes. Or life happens and we have to abate taxes. Tragedy is one of the reasons that the state has in. If your house, God forbid this happens to anybody, but we all know it does, if your house burns to the ground, the state of New Hampshire allows that you can have an abatement off of your taxes and not have to pay taxes on a building that now is no longer there. So overlay is that extra amount of money that is being asked to be raised by all taxpayers to be able to cover for these kinds of items. Somebody may successfully argue their assessment. Did anybody want to argue their assessment during the reval? Right. So some people, some people successfully argued that and were granted abatements. So that's what the overlay covers.
25 years ago, I argued the whole assessment of Tufton Borough.
And how well did you succeed for that?
We won.
There you go. So that's impressive. All right, and then veterans credits. When we give money and for what they give us to be able to give a veteran a small amount off their taxes that's a huge thank you.
Sure.
But that money still has to be raised because we're still spending money. So we have to ask everybody in town to raise a little bit extra in money so that we can allow this select group of people to not pay it. And I don't mean that in that select group. I'm certainly not saying I wanted to mean that because I have not served, but I am so thankful for those that do because I'm not capable of it. I'm a fight or flight, I fly. So you don't want me in the service. All right, and that brings you down to the net municipal tax effort. That is then divided by the value of the town, and then that comes up to such a small, teeny tiny number that none of us understand fractions of pennies that small, that we then just multiply it by $1,000 to bring it to a number that makes sense to our brains. And that's where we come up with a tax rate of, per $1,000 evaluation. I'm going to tell you $3.21 was what your tax rate was in 2025. The town I was town administrator of, we were probably 3, 4, maybe 5 times that for the municipal portion alone.
Wow.
So phenomenal, people. This is phenomenal that your taxes are your rate is this small. And then you can say, well, Tammy, we just had the reval. And that's where I'm going to say my next slide, even though it didn't look like it changed, it really did. This compares your 24 to your 25, and your 24 prior to reval is still smaller than the town that I has been paying for taxes every year. So excellent job. All right, so, and that's that small town who wants the same services that the larger towns have, but it also means you have to pay more for those services. So property tax process, this now is just an example of if you take, and in this town I Google does some amazing things. An average house in Wolfeboro is about $600,000, so that's why I used this. And then I applied the tax rate, and so the average house in town does pay about $5,000 a year in taxes. And that is the total tax rate, by the way. That's not just the municipal side. So how do you calculate how much something is going to cost you? Do not ask me why this is the 3-finger rule, because my fingers are a lot bigger than the numbers are. But it is called a 3-finger rule. And basically, when you have an assessed value, take the last 3 digits off the assessed value, and that's $1 on your tax rate. So $4.8 million of expenses is $1 on your tax rate. All right, and then that keeps going down. Drop a digit, and it goes to 10 cents. Drop the next digit, it goes to 1 cent. All right, so then I had given you, I've used the fire truck and a collective bargaining unit, and just done out the calculations as to how to get those tax impacts. So the school, because the school plays a very large portion, not in your town meeting process, but in that bill that you send out the door to people. And unfortunately, you guys send out the bill, so the municipalities tend to be the ones who pay for that bill. And municipalities tend to be the ones that get the cuts prior to school for 2 reasons. 1, we want to do more for our kids. That's where our hearts are. And 2, you're the messenger. So I do want to talk about the school for just a little bit. The school does work on the same kind of basis that the town does. They have the same concept where they have their version of a governing body, they have their version of the budget committee, probably the same of you guys, right? You guys do the school as well?
No,
No, because it's a regional school
Correct.
then. Okay. So they had the ability, though, to be a budget committee. If they're not, they can be just at their level.
they have a finance committee, that's it. They don't-
Okay.
Right.
All right, so their rules are very similar. And one of the more common questions that I get is, what about fund balance? We hear that the schools are not allowed to carry a fund balance. How come I don't ever see a check given from the school to the town? They are not allowed a fund balance unless their legislative body, which would be all of the voters in the regionalized area, have said that they can retain a certain percentage, and there's limits on what that percentage can be, and they're very small limits. When they have anything above and beyond that, that gets subtracted from their appropriations at tax rate setting time. That's how their fund balance is turned in. So just like, and don't get sick as I back you up really fast, just like on this screen, when I say the fund balance that is subtracted so the taxpayers don't have to raise it, it works the same way for the school. It is subtracted from their appropriations before their tax effort is calculated. So they are turning it back in, it's just not coming in a form of a check to somebody.
It's automatic.
Just like the towns are when the taxpayers, when the legislative body says to use fund balance. Same idea. All right, and then how about grant funds? And I've told you grant funds do not offset operating expenses for a town. Thankfully, with as expensive as schools are to run, they can get grants to offset operating expenses. And so that's what this slide is. So first, to put it in perspective, this is very similar to the slide I gave you with inflation on it. This is just breaking down what towns get for construction, for general, for highway, for environmental services, the same things we looked at a couple slides ago. Now I'm going to take these numbers, and to the bottom of it, I'm going to add what the schools get. So our schools is the dark number on the bottom. They get a huge amount of money throughout the state to offset their expenses. All right, so this is when they come through, and I didn't even look at them on the tax paperwork, but when this comes through and they have this large amount of money that they're asking for a budget, and then they give you the hard to swallow but smaller, much smaller number of what it's going to cost the taxpayers. This is why, because they get a huge chunk of grant money. All right, and how about the county? Do you have a say in the county budget?
Nope.
You do.
You do?
You do have a say. So a county
Thank
budget,
God.
a county budget is determined by the county convention. The county convention is who? It's the representatives for the towns, the districts that are within that town. And they're the ones that determine what a county budget is going to be. So how do you have a say? Talk to your local representatives, state representatives. They're the ones that vote in your budget. So do you have a direct vote? No. But do you have a voice? Yes. All right, and what you get for revenues differ county by county depending on the services that county offers. All right, and then the one thing to remember, big thing to remember about school and county payments, the school payments and the county payments by law must be paid out of the town's checkbook to the school, to the county once a year by December 17th, to the school based on their required needs schedule that they should be sharing with the town. And the school is typically monthly, the county is annually, but it doesn't matter if your taxpayers have paid the town or not. The town shall pay those payments. And if that means the town has to go out and borrow money to do so, then that's what they do. This is another huge reason to keep some extra money in your fund balance, so that the knowing that part of that cash that's sitting in the checkbook is for the school and the county payments. Right? You're sitting on money that's not yours.
Just one thing, I figured out that our school taxes total, state and local, is about 53% of our tax bills. So the tax bill says town of Wolfeboro, 53% of the money goes to the school district. But they're heavily, they heavily rely on local property taxes.
Yes.
So I don't mean to throw shade at them, but that's their problem.
And that is every municipality, not just here, that is every municipality, yes. So any of these numbers that were just discussed, anybody can find on DRA's websites. You can, easiest way to get to it, because the DRA website, I don't find the easiest to navigate with a new website, so I rely more on Google to bring me to the right page. So if you use, obviously I use Google for my search engine, use whatever search engine you want. Google, you can Google New Hampshire property tax rates, New Hampshire DRA property tax rates. Every single rate and the money, the rate broken down between town, county, school, and village districts are right on their website. And they track it for year by year.
And thank you for complimenting us. And I'd just like to say that throughout the state, there are about 230 taxing municipalities, and only 9 of them have a lower tax rate than we do.
Yep, so when I did a budget and finance workshop in the fall, we do an annual one for the municipalities. I did do the top 5 and the lowest 5, and when I saw this town's tax rate, the first thing I did was go to that slide and say, God, I don't remember them there, but they should be. You're not, but yes, it sounds like you're right above it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
All
you.
right, so, anybody here in the front row have questions?
Can you back up to the, to that big stacked bar chart? That one. So where's the source of funds, just generally speaking, from the state side on this one? Where are they getting the money?
Most of this money from the state is for the school side. Most of it is a direct pass-through from federal monies. For the highway funds, some of it is passed through from federal money, some of it would be road tolls, some of it would be DMV money. The DES money is, I can't guarantee it, but a good portion of that is gonna be passed through federal money. And the light blue amount, so I'm gonna go back one more, cause it's easier to see the town's portion. The light blue amount here, that is the majority of that, though not all of it, is your rooms and meals tax.
What do you think of the,
Thank you.
the comparison of the full value tax rates? Where DRA compares the tax rate, but they do it based on,
Equalization.
yes.
All right, so there's a huge reason for equalized values, and that's when it comes time to apportion. And you guys are the perfect example if you have a regional school district. You just went through a reval. What happened to your town's value?
Went way up.
Way up.
Just a little bit?
Almost double.
Yeah. All right, so now what happens with the town that hasn't done their reval recently? So when you apportion that school payment, do you think it's fair if they take current town values and ask Wolfeboro to pay a lot more because your current valuation has had a reval when somebody else in the district has not? So the job of equalization is to take everybody's value and bring everybody's value to a estimated fair market value, so it's a level playing field for everybody. That's what equalization does, and it needs to continue in my mind, absolutely needs to continue,
And it
because
gives you a better picture of where your tax burden
Yes.
is compared to other
Yes.
towns.
County is another one. School we all understand better because it's local, but county works the same way. County is based on the equalized value of every municipality within the county.
I had a question that came up. The county courthouse, is that part of the county's budget or is that funded through the state?
County budget. Should be. And now I'm not gonna answer that, cause, that would be up to, that'd be up to the county commissioners would be the better one, but I've never heard of a courthouse being run by somebody other than the county.
The jail.
Same with the jail, same with the nursing
Because when
homes.
I looked at our county, it says that the jail is funded, but it didn't specifically say the courthouse was part of their budget when I was looking at their audit.
Hence the reason that I'm not gonna answer that, just in case I'm wrong. I will say as a rule of thumb, it is done by the county, and it's probably just buried in their administrative costs, if you looked at the audit.
Oh, and for information for people, the assessors in the state of New Hampshire are regulated by the OPLC, which is the Office of Professional Licensure and Certification.
Yes.
DRA guidelines, RSA 75:8-A, and ASB, which is the Assessing Standards Board.
Yes.
We are not assessed by the town of Wolfeboro. Wolfeboro does not do it. We just hire an assessor who uses all these standards, and they give us the valuation and the numbers.
Arm's length.
Yeah. And I will say that assessors right now are very, very, very difficult to find. I know of quite a few municipalities that have put out requests for proposals to assessors and gotten back nothing, except maybe thank you but no's.
Auditors, too.
Auditors are rapidly gaining, but they're not as bad as assessors yet, but they're catching up fast.
And also, 78A, well, it says that towns must assess at least as often as every 5 years.
That is correct. You must have a townwide reval at least every 5 years.
Ossipee did it on the 4th year, twice in a row. That's how much, and we popped up right after the pandemic. Our fair market value went way up. Our assessed value came way down. We probably could have done this 2 years ago.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else in the front row for me?
Excellent. Thank you
No,
very
thank
much.
you.
All right. Thank you guys for having me. And
Excellent.
and NHMA does thank you for inviting us.
Thanks very much.
Good job.
An hour and a half.